More today on the Albanese government's push to bring back to Australia women who chose to leave this country to join Islamic State and their children. While there's no doubt plenty of sympathy for the children who are, in all of this, innocent, for the women, little sympathy. After all, they chose to join the death cult and involve themselves in an ideology that was fixated on the violent death and destruction of our Western way of life. These are women who joined a death cult intent on killing Australian soldiers, intent on mass casualty terror attacks against innocent civilians overseas and, of course, here at home. For me, the images of journalists and aid workers kneeling in their orange jumpsuits as Islamic State madmen decapitated them with swords, all the while praising Allah, are images I can't get out of my mind. And when we want to talk about bringing these women home, it's those images I can't forget. And I doubt I'm alone. Is it any wonder that this plan to return the Jihadi Brides to the suburbs of Melbourne and Sydney wasn't a feature of the last election? I don't recall it ever being mentioned once by the Prime Minister, but here we are with a National Security Cabinet meeting today, meeting to tick off all the details. The risk to the lives of Australian military and police will be forced to go into a war zone, and bring them out cannot be underestimated. And the ongoing need to spend millions and millions in monitoring and surveillance to ensure they don't do here what they clearly supported Islamic State doing to others overseas will go on for years. Here is the former Home Affairs Minister last night on this program explaining why she never supported bringing these Islamic State women to Australia.
The risk that our personnel would have been under in going into Syria was one of the reasons that I was very much opposed in my time as Home Affairs Minister to sending them in there to conduct any such mission to bring these people out of Syria.
And believe me, Karen Andrews will have had all the detailed briefings on this. If she says the risk was too great, I believe her over the bleeding hearts in some of the newspapers today who want these women and children home on the next available flight. That we're going to have to spend millions on welfare, housing and justice programs for these women says everything. Given the large number of convicted terrorists already in our justice system, we know how much it costs to monitor individuals 24/7. And that's just those already here in Australia, not these extra 50 or so that the Prime Minister wants to bring here. Now, on this point, former Defence Minister, former Home Affairs Minister now, Opposition Leader Peta Credlin was blunt today.
It's also the case that in Australia here we have a number of high-risk offenders who have been charged with terrorist offences, who have served out their jail terms, who will be coming into the Australian community over the next few years. Now, that can cost millions of dollars on an individual case for ASIO and for the Australian Federal Police and the other agencies to monitor those individuals. And if you're going to bring in dozens more of those cases of people who potentially pose a threat in our country, we need to understand how it is, with limited resources, ASIO and the Australian Federal Police can provide the guarantees to keep the Australian public safe.
Those idiots in the left-wing media out there today who think it's just a case of an ankle bracelet to monitor these people have got no idea the work that ASIO does in this country now and the AFP to keep us safe. As the former Minister Karen Andrews said again last night, we don't even know the ages of these children or how radicalised they might already be.
We don't know about the children at this stage. We don't know the age of the children, although that information would be held by the government and the intelligence agencies. So the first question is, how old are these children? How old are the male children? Because we know that there is a high risk of males becoming radicalised in the circumstances in which these children have found themselves.
And on this point too, the opposition leader, Peta Credlin.
And so the Prime Minister needs to provide the detail and provide the assurance to the Australian public, because these are very serious cases. In some circumstances, we're not talking about kids of 5 and 6 and 7 years of age. We're talking about young adolescent boys who have been in a camp where they've only been socialising with radical people. And let's be very frank about that. I want to do everything I can to keep the Australian public safe, and I want to hear from the government about the assurances that they can provide that that is going to be the case.
And this point as well.
We need to know, for example, whether or not all of these individuals are Australian citizens, because sometimes, particularly where an Australian citizen male has gone to fight for ISIL and they've been killed in that theatre of war, those orphan children will end up with other parents. And so I just need some information. I think the Australian public would demand information about the individual cases.
Aside from security and police resources to monitor them on return, the Albanese government's making a lot of noise about de-radicalisation programs. To date as a country, we've spent millions, tens of millions of dollars on these de-radicalisation programs with little proof they work. Indeed, recent assessments, very doubtful.
A lot of evidence to suggest that you can de-radicalise people successfully. In fact, there's way more examples of people who have continued to conduct terrorist offences, including a couple in the UK in the last couple of years.
As an example on this very point, in December 2019, a man fatally stabbed 2 people near London Bridge in the UK capital. The attacker was a convicted Islamic terrorist who'd recently been released. He had attended 2 counter-terrorism programs during his 8-year prison sentence and again following his release. The then Home Secretary at the time, Peta Credlin, said that the government, quote, had been confronted with some hard truths about how they deal with terrorist offenders. The Prison Officers Association also said that a fundamental review of de-radicalisation programs in the UK was needed. So you can see my reservation here and the reservations of the former ministers, can't you? We've got a government that seems hell-bent on bringing these women back to Australia, and it would seem the programs that the government says will keep Australians safe are programs that, as experience shows elsewhere, are dangerously hit and miss at the best.